Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this night's program. Thank you for joining us. I want to talk a moment about what inspired this year's series, Defining America. And I think that many of you, this topic resonates while you're here tonight, and certainly our speaker for the night resonates with you. But I wanted to talk a little bit about why we are doing these series and what the intent is this year. I would offer to you that we are experiencing a lot of strife in our nation right now, particularly over the last year and a half. And so this series was meant and designed to explore what lies beneath it through a few different lenses, asking some tough questions about what it means to be an American, lets us look more closely at our foundations of our communities and the complexities of our lived experiences. Since business is an important driver in our national and local economies, it is also, in a sense, a window into our national consciousness. As a 21st century American, we all are consumers in one way or another. And if we invest any money at all, we're all business people to some extent. The nature of the globalized marketplace is such that it touches people whom we don't know, but touches them all around the world each and every day. As technology, communication, and travel become more sophisticated, it's easier to see those impacts more clearly from great distances. The United States has a proud tradition of entrepreneurship. Business ventures have allowed many people in the U.S. to pull themselves out of poverty and into the middle class, and oftentimes beyond that. There are dramatic stories of recent immigrants who have risen to wealth in a single generation because of American opportunity in the business space. Businesses have expanded our economy by creating employment and arguably have raised the standard of living for many Americans who have greater access to less expensive markets and a wide variety of goods. One of the central narratives of the American dream has always been access to opportunity. And business has oftentimes been a pathway to that end for many people. Some well-known financially successful Americans started out with a simple idea, convinced someone to invest capital, and grew it far beyond their own dreams. However, our markets have changed dramatically over the last 50 years. An explosion of choices and commodities and the globalization of trade and production lines has made entrepreneurship a more sophisticated venture than ever. Changing social conditions, an unequal distribution of wealth, and changes in the environment have introduced complexities never imagined by earlier generations. In fact, businesses are now asked to engage in questions about the environment in which they never have had to do before. For instance, when Henry Ford produced automobiles in 1908, very few people were talking about global warming at that time. They're asked to think about healthy eating in ways that the fast food industry did not consider in the 1940s and 50s when it first grew into popularity in this country. Increasingly, businesses that reap large profits and operate across national borders are being asked what they're doing to narrow the extremes of wealth in our planet. In other words, there's a growing connection between business and social responsibility. The American democratic tradition, which privileges free speech and individual choice, has made American consumers particularly suited to driving business in many different directions. And no one knows that better than tonight's guest speaker, Seth Goldman, the co-founder of Honest Tea. Seth, I look forward to hearing from you about your inspiring journey this evening and answering a set of questions that I think will help engage our audience in some very thoughtful ways. But before I begin the conversation with Mr. Goldman, I'd like to introduce Steve Hall, who is the editor and publisher of Bethesda Magazine and Bethesda Beat. Both are extremely popular and, I might add, well-needed resources in our circles. So we're very pleased that Bethesda Beat is a media sponsor for this event. Steve, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you so much, everyone, and good evening, and thanks, Darian. Bethesda Magazine and Bethesda Beat are pleased to be the media sponsors of the entire Montgomery College Presidential Dialogue Series and hope to see you at the other two events coming up. And it's my pleasure tonight to introduce our speaker, our guest. About 8 years ago, my wife Susan and I were on vacation in California, and we stopped at a small luncheonette in Half Moon Bay. And while we were waiting for our sandwiches, I went back to the cooler to get some drinks. And there in the cooler were bottles of Honest Tea. And I was so excited to see Honest Tea all the way out in California that I actually texted Seth and said, "You're not going to believe this, but there's Honest Tea in this small luncheonette all the way out in Half Moon Bay." Well, that was then. Today, Honest Tea brands are carried in more than 130,000 outlets in the United States. I think it's probably in that place in Half Moon Bay still. And tomorrow, Seth leaves to go to Europe to kick off distribution there of the brands. In 2011, Honest Tea was acquired by the Coca-Cola Company, helping to further the reach and impact of Honest Tea's mission by becoming the first organic and fair trade brand in the world's largest beverage distribution system. Today, Seth has transitioned to a new role at Honest Tea as TEO Emeritus and Innovation Catalyst for Coca-Cola's Venturing and Emerging Brands business unit. This transition allows him to take on an additional role as Executive Chairman of Beyond Meat, a privately held California-based enterprise on the cutting edge of plant-based protein research and development. If you haven't had one of their patties, I did recently at a Bethesda Green Gala, and if you didn't know it wasn't really meat, there's no way of telling. It's absolutely delicious. In 2015, Seth was named the #1 disruptor by Beverage World and Beverage Executive of the Year by Beverage Industry Magazine. Seth these days is bi-coastal. He lives most of his time in Bethesda, not far from the Honest Tea headquarters, and part of his time, this is tough living, in Manhattan Beach, California, near the offices of Beyond Meat. Seth, thank you so much for being here tonight.
So thank you so much, Steve. And just for our audience, so you'll know how the plan for this evening, I have a set of questions where I get to indulge my inner Oprah. And I will be asking a series of questions to Seth. And we'll do that probably until the top of the hour at 8. And then we'll be inviting audience members then to participate and to pose questions, to expand upon what may have already been asked, to ask things that you've been wanting to know. I know we have a number of students in the room, entrepreneurs, local community members as well. So I look forward to your participation. There are 3 microphones at that point. I'll redirect you as well to make sure you are at a mic. And then, of course, if you're on social media while you're here, we welcome the opportunity for you to help lift up this type of event that's happening in your own community. Thank you, Senator Kagan. With that, I'm going to ask you, Seth, and we started a series of conversations, in particular about your business plan. But before we even move directly into that, I read recently that you were drawn when you talked about your business plan and were thinking about this a while at the Yale School of Management. You had this quote, "You became awakened to the idea that a business could be a driver of social change." And I'm struck oftentimes, as I share with you, we tend to see business as there's this false dichotomy. You're a business person or you're a lever of social change. You're either this or that. I think what you've offered is there's a confluence and it should not be separate. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And first, let me just say what an honor it is to be here. I'm a great admirer of both the school and the students who are here. I was saying that some of the best entrepreneurs in the country come from a school like this where you're self-made, where nothing's handed to you and you have to figure things out along the way. So this is a great community to be in. And yes, I have always considered myself an activist before being a business person. I say I'm an activist in a businessman's body. Before I went to the Yale School of Management, I worked on Capitol Hill. I worked in the Senate for Lloyd Bentsen. I ran a nonprofit program in Baltimore, which was a precursor to AmeriCorps. So when I went to business school, it was with the lens of how do I help national service get to scale? And what was interesting is that the first business case we studied it's called Rainforest Crunch. It was a story about a spinoff from Ben & Jerry's. And what I realize is that you can address social, environmental issues and concerns through business. And I just hadn't sort of made that connection before. And all of a sudden I realized, and I had, like a lot of nonprofits, had been out raising money. And I thought, well, what if I don't have to, what if the market is the way to raise the money? What if the consumer is my funder? What if I create a market-based way to drive change? And I still have to go out and ask for money every year, but it's through selling a product. And so I didn't know at that time it would be Honest Tea, but I really got excited about this idea that business, we can bring an agenda to business. And so I still think of myself in national service, but it's in the private sector.
Where do you think how has this, this bifurcation, why do you think it's evolved, or where has it evolved from it? And why do we seem to be okay with that idea? That's why I really struggle with that.
Well, I really enjoyed your opening remarks. I think it's a really good challenge that whether deliberate or not, business does shape the way we live, and not just the economic disparities, the things we eat, the way we dress, the way we interact with each other. And so then the question is, can you be intentional about what you do? I think a lot of businesses have grown to scale, at least thus far, more concerned with a profit incentive versus thinking about all the other ripples that happen from the interactions. And so those interactions happen whether you are intentional about it or not. And I think what's different about our business and some of the others is, let's be intentional. Let's think about what happens when we buy tea leaves from across the world. What happens to the community we source from? What happens to the ecosystem when they put pesticides on those plants? What happens to the people involved in the tea growing communities when those pesticides are put on those plants? And so it doesn't sound like it's that big a leap, and it really is just being intentional about it and saying, okay, if we can bring intention to every decision, then we may not be able to make every decision the ideal way, but at least we're thinking about it in a broader context, as much like a government would or should. The challenge is to keep there's so many layers. So all right, well, we got our tea leaves, but let's think about our sugar, and let's think about, now we know the environmental conditions, but what about the economic conditions, and what about the educational conditions for the children of these tea workers, and what about their health care, and what about their eye care? So you'll never get to a place where you're going to make every decision where you're content, but we believe you should never stop challenging yourself.
I love this idea that travel has figured so prominently in how you do this work. And when you read some of the things you've written, or your podcast, when you talk about this, you've been through India, Russia, China, all of these places that that drew you to tea. So I'm interested in two parts of that. One, what drew you to tea? But then the other part of this is, how has travel influenced the way you think about the way you've organized your business?
So there's a lot there. Let me just start with the one thing I got, and I think this is what I was trying to mention in my earlier remarks, that I think a lot of the students here are getting. The first thing travel did for me, so I grew up outside of Boston, grew up in Wellesley. My parents were both professors. I went to college at Harvard. My parents were nearby, so I needed to get out, get out of town. And I went to China, where basically, a billion people around me, maybe I knew 5 people to start. And so I had to sort of start on my own and figure things out and learn the language and make a living and find a place to live. And that's why I say a lot of the students here have come, either to this country or to this community with very little, and are able to find a way to not just survive, but to thrive. And so that's the first thing, is learning to be not just self-dependent, but resourceful. And by doing that, you gain that confidence to be able to deal with unfamiliar situations. So no matter what context you're in, I know there's moments where things are scary. I remember one time in China, I got out, I would just get up, I taught during the week, but on the weekends I'd get on a train, literally just get on a train, and I'd just get out somewhere. And I remember walking out one night in Hunan, China. It was like 10 at night, and I thought, there's literally, for hundreds of millions of people around, nobody knows me. And that was just kind of a wild feeling to feel like that. And so learning that resourcefulness and okay, I found a way to get around and gaining that confidence. But the other thing, of course, when you go out into the world, you number one, you develop a sense of humility, because it's a big world. There's a lot of people out there, and whether it's the beauty and majesty of the planet we're on, or of the people, you may think, with your education, and you have, a lot of, you may think you know a lot, and then you realize you only know a certain set of things. One of the best lessons I learned was actually in a community in China, in Anhui province in south central China. And I know, so I had traveled a long way. I'd come to this community to visit what I thought we were going to see the tea bushes. And so my host, we sort of flew and drove and flew and drove. Eventually we get to this end of the road, and we say, okay, now we walk, and I'm still looking for tea bushes. I don't see any. And I said, well, where are the tea bushes? And they said, well, it's on the other side of the river. So naturally, I'm looking for the bridge, because you're in commerce.
Right.
And I said, well, is there a bridge? I said, no, there's no bridge. I wonder if I'm one of those Zen parables where you'd already been with the tea leaves. I said, well, have you thought about building a bridge? Because once again, that's what I would assume made sense. And they said, no. And I said, well, why not? So they said, well, number one, we're a poor province. We can't just put up a bridge, right? Number two, there's a lot of flooding in this part of China, so you may be far away from land or close to, during different times of the year. Number three, it's an organic tea garden, so there's no need for large bags of chemicals or heavy equipment. But what they said that really stuck with me is if we build a bridge, then there'll be a road, and if we build a road, there'll be infrastructure, and if there's infrastructure, there'll be pollution. And so instead of this bridge, they had this bamboo raft that kept going back and forth, but that was their way of protecting the community. So here I was with my Western education and my MBA, and I said, you got to build a bridge. And that was exactly the wrong thing for that community. Wow. And so for me, it was, oh, yeah, okay, not only do I not know everything, sometimes what I think is the solution is the wrong thing.
Well, the intentionality of the lack of a solution is pretty profound.
Yeah, that's right. So that kind of, that way of thinking actually I've sort of brought that to a lot of you bring it to agriculture because we see pests in a field and we know that pesticides is a solution to that problem. But we know now that that solution creates other problems. So travel has absolutely expanded, not just the way I see the world, but the way I think about the world. And certainly tea. Tea is the world's second most popular drink. It's second only to water. Yes. So both China and Russia are huge tea drinking countries and cultures, and I spent a year in each of those. And what I learned about tea is that it really is this drink people share. It's how friendships are formed or sorrows are shared. It's really the first way you connect with somebody in those countries is to share a cup of tea. And so I thought, wow, that would be that's a wonderful thing to be doing here in this country if we can help connect people, not just to each other, but to nature as well.
I love that idea of the tea having a symbolic purpose as well. Several of us just returned from Asia and in Korea and China as a part of the county's economic development venture. We saw that every place we sat down to talk, before we could talk business, before we talked about talent development, workforce development, new business, it was, let's share a cup of tea. And there was something about the ritual of that was symbolic for within the culture, but I would also offer, you're suggesting, it also is a consciousness-raising effort exercise as well.
And it also is a step towards saying we're not all business all the time. I remember right after college, I had an internship in Hong Kong with the consulate there, and I went to meet with a bunch of different businessmen, they were men at the time, and they would invite me and they'd offer me a cup of tea, and sometimes I'd be so, I'd try to sound professional, no thank you, and I realized I was insulting people by not doing that. So if anyone offers you a cup of tea, you really have to say yes. Yeah. And by the way, we are offering bottles of tea after this event, and I'll be insulted if you don't take it.
Note to self, do not insult Seth. So your business plan that actually one of our faculty members was sharing that she uses that as part of the curriculum and the students follow that. It says that the issues of social and environmental responsibility are central to Honest Tea's identity and purpose. That was pretty profound to me when I saw that. What does that mean for you in your company, and how do you play that out in policy?
Sure.
And my question I'll come back to is also, was there a time when that has been challenging for you?
Sure.
So I think it's one thing to espouse it and lift it up and say this is what we do, but when rubber hits the road, what does that actually look like?
Yeah. So first of all, our business plan is on our website. It's really the original business plan for the company, and we wanted to open source it. It doesn't contain any proprietary secrets, but it does certainly share what we were thinking of. And what's neat about it is if you go back, and whether it's that statement around our aspirations for social responsibility or the marketing vision we have for the brand, I would say we're still true to that. We've kept it honest. What it means is that we really do want to bring that intentionality. So we should not let ourselves off the hook around any decision that we have to make. We have a commitment to whether it's to the health of our consumer, to bring a product that's healthier to market, to the health of the planet. Can we bring out a product in a way that has a lighter environmental footprint, whether it's the way the ingredients are grown or the package, of course. And then to the communities we source from. Can we be creating community wealth? Can we find ways to source our product in a way that helps develop and create economic opportunity for communities that often lack it? So absolutely there's times where there's a tension. There has to be, right? I mean, we're working, if a commitment to sustainability, the definition of sustain is to nourish and uphold life, but we operate in a consumer economy, and the definition of consume is to devour and destroy. So there's a contradiction there, right? I mean, automatically.
Inherent.
And so, we have a package that is recyclable, but it's, a lot of those, billions of those packages don't get recycled. So we're responsible for that because we're putting it out there. We do what we can to lightweight the product. The package we're launching in Europe is actually a plant-based bottle. We're working to bring that same technology here to the United States, but it's also recyclable. But the first step is being honest about that, not just sort of pretending we don't see it. And so one of the cases where we had a challenge, back in 2003, we brought out our first Fair Trade certified bottle tea. It was the first time we had found a way to source a tea that was investing in the community. And so we said, naturally, well, couldn't we make the whole line Fair Trade? This tea did so well, and it tasted great, and still out there, called Peach Oolong Long. Can't we make everything Fair Trade? And what we looked at is it would either meant raising our price to the point where we have this commitment to democratizing organics. Our goal has always been able to make these products accessible, not just to the healthiest, wealthiest people, but to everybody. And we knew if we had to raise the price, almost double it, that wouldn't have, that would have sacrificed that part of the mission. Or the other part was we would have had to compress our margins, so we would have lost money. And of course, that would have put us out of business. That wouldn't have done anyone any good. So what we said was, well, we're committed to fair trade, but it's a journey. It's not an end point. And so starting from 2003, we then worked over the next 8 years. It was only after Coke bought Honest Tea that we were able to make everything, all of the teas fair trade. And it was only last year that we were able to get all of the sugar fair trade certified. So, we're still on the journey. And I think you could say, well, back in 2003, we made a decision and we didn't let the mission win. But it's like, it's Dr. King used to quote, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Right. And I think as long as we know which way we're bending, we just keep headed in that direction.
What's so profound for me about that, too, is that I suspect that wasn't the plan when you first started.
No.
So this idea that this process is iterative and you have
Absolutely.
to adapt and be more agile, but also set aspirational goals. I think that to me is something that would resonate, I think, with students and entrepreneurs who are thinking, okay, here's this product that I have a plan and it's going to be like this, but the reality is that over the course of this, you're going to have to adapt that in ways and have to make hard decisions.
Always. I mean, I think look, that's, as people, we're all on that journey too, right? We all want to challenge ourselves to be our better selves, but no one's perfect, and so, can you just be a little bit better tomorrow than you were today? Or maybe not even day to day, maybe it's a week to week, maybe it's year to year. But what can you do to improve on yourself? And we see that at Honest Tea as part of our, the path we're on as well. And I think part of that, the keys there are you have to be honest with yourself. You have to have a sense of humility, right? And as long as you're able to have those two things, and be open to, continuing to evolve.
Another part of your business plan intrigued me. You said, when choosing among purchasing decisions, you will, quote, attempt to choose the option which better addresses the needs of economically disadvantaged communities. Would you do this even at the cost of profit, and why?
Yeah. No, so I mentioned we moved to fair trade sugar. Right. So it's a great example because we were buying organic sugar. We've been buying that from the beginning. But the decision to go to fair trade means that when we buy a pound of sugar, a portion of the money goes, an extra portion of the money, so if it costs us $2 a pound, maybe it's $2.10, that extra 10 cents per pound goes back to the cooperative we buy from. In this case, it's in Paraguay. And just in this past year was $500,000 that we put back into fair trade. And absolutely, that $500,000 means it was $500,000 less profit for us. But we decided that that was the right thing to do for the brand, for what we stand for, and for these sourcing communities. You could try to argue that this was an investment in our supply chain, and that would be partially true. But what was funny was that when we looked at that decision, some folks, we're owned by Coca-Cola, some folks asked us, well, what's the return on investment for that? And I said, I have no idea. I know it's the right thing to do, but I can't tell you, I just know that's the right thing to do. And they didn't push back. They understood. And in fact, the business case for this really came from the folks in Atlanta. So that was really, for me, that was a gratifying moment because I supported it, obviously, but the idea really came from Atlanta.
So you've used this word fair trade, and I suspect there are a significant number of the room who understand that and some who don't. So
sure.
I know that you decided to join the fair trade movement. Why did you do that? And maybe talk a little bit about what that meant and how you've accomplished that.
So it's important because what it really means is that there's standards used to inspect the labor conditions in the gardens, and that money goes back to these communities. But what's important about it is it's a third-party verified standard. And there was actually an item in today's Washington Post about it. So the reason that's important is because Honest Tea, now being owned by the Coca-Cola Company, it's easy for large companies to be people to suspect that large companies aren't always being upfront about what they do. And so I had said a long time ago, let's not leave this open to interpretation. We're not going to put the word socially responsible on this package and then someone has to guess what that means or someone has to audit it. So let's go with, same with organic. Let's not try to say environmentally friendly. Right. Let's use a standard, a third-party verified standard, the USDA organic standard, in this case, the federal government, and then the fair trade seal is on the back here. These are a third party that goes and inspects the gardens. They get paid a certification fee, but they don't get rewarded if they give us the license or not. That's, we have to qualify for it. So from our point of view, it's really important to have that third party, not just inspecting the labor conditions, but also looking to make sure the money's going back to these communities the way we say it is.
Do you think it resonates with consumers, or how do you know that it resonates with consumers?
It's hard to know. It's one of those things where I don't have the data. I do know it resonates with us. It's consistent. It's what we should be doing. People have joked that, or people have said Honest Tea is a socially conscious company, and I joke that it's a Julie conscious company. Julie is my wife, and what I mean by that is I have to go home every night, and I get to go home every night and look my wife in the eye and my 3 sons, and I need to be able to look them in the eye and say I believe in what I'm doing, and I'll be honest, we're not doing as much as we could do, but. I've always wanted to say, if you call yourself Honest Tea, doesn't mean you're perfect on day one, but it means you're always striving to be better. And so this was a great example of, where we want to do that. I can't tell you what the market return is, but we are the top selling organic tea in the country. We are growing. And so, I also believe, without getting too spiritual here, I do believe in karma. I think that when you do the right thing repeatedly, you may not see the rewards immediately. It may be 5, 10, 15 year, 20, maybe the next lifetime you see the reward, but I just think there's no downside to doing the right thing.
I love that idea of doing the right thing, not once, but repeatedly, because that then makes it the habit. That's what makes it a way of doing
and it starts to be a behavior, not just that you expect of yourself, but your employees expect of you, your peers expect of you, and your family too.
Yeah, that's a wonderful quote by Gandhi. Your words become your habits become your, so that's exactly it. Do you think that there is a growing market in the U.S. for companies that value social responsibility? And has there been a change in the way that your research would tell you about how consumers are choosing to use their dollars in that space?
There absolutely is. I mean, consumers are more and more, partially through the internet, we're able to connect the consequences of our actions to what it means. So whether it's more information, either through the package or through just the access to information people have, I think people are making that connection. I will also say, in this political context that we're in, that people feel the need to stand for, stand out and stand up for what they believe in. And so the neat thing about food is you have the opportunity 3 times a day to connect your ideas to to your behavior. And so a lot of people obviously don't make that choice, but we're certainly seeing more people move towards this. And what's so exciting for us at Honest Tea and at Beyond Meat, this other company involved in it, is that it's growing, and the big companies are getting the message. So the most exciting news that's happened to Honest Tea this year is that our Honest Kids drink, it's an organic kids drink, is just launched this month in McDonald's. So now every McDonald's Happy Meal can come with an Honest Kids drink. And so for tens of millions of Americans, this will be the first organic drink they consume. It'll also be at 35 calories. It's going instead of an 80-calorie drink. So you think about if we can help those tens of millions of Americans develop a palate for a less sweet drink that early, that can have profound long-term impact. And that, obviously, I was happy to sell it, but a lot of the demand for that came from McDonald's, who saw their consumer changing. So a company like McDonald's should get credit for that, but the real credit goes to the consumer who started asking for that type of thing.
So the consumers then do have the ability
So
to
powerful.
drive that.
Yeah, that's so powerful.
Kind of like voters, right?
Totally.
They have the ability to drive that.
Voting. You are voting with your, whether or not it's conscious, you're voting with your dollars every day when you make a food purchase. Most people don't think about it that way, and so they just like it's the same as not going to vote. Or in fact, it's the worst because you really are voting even if you don't think about it. But you have the chance to vote affirmatively when you choose the foods you choose.
So whether it be voting or in some cases this idea of consumers, it is dependent upon a certain amount of education as a consumer to be able to make those healthy choices.
That's right.
I was struck also in your business plan that you had a quote by a Chinese poet where you say that one of the greatest evils in the world is spoiling young people through, quote, bad education. And I love that. Obviously, in my space, it's pretty important. What do you think is the role of education in creating socially conscious consumers?
Well, first of all, education is critical as the mechanism. It's the gear. It's the fluid for the gears for economic mobility. If you don't have education, there's no ability to create mobility, economic opportunity. So, to me, it's fundamental. It really, and as I said, my parents were both professors, and we were a very overeducated family. In my, I went to Harvard and Yale, and I was the sort of slagger in my family. So my parents valued it very highly, not just because it really isn't about knowledge. I think that's the mistake sometimes young people think that it's all about gaining knowledge. It's really about gaining wisdom. It's about gaining the ability to take knowledge and put it to work, to interpret it. So it's not that you read a book. It's what do you do with what you've read, and how do you discern it? How do you put it to use? And so, in a sense, that's almost a different skill, but so important. I think it's just a critical part for our society, and so when we aren't investing in education, if that ever happens, it says we're not investing in our future.
What about those, I was struck, there's a piece, Sunday's Post, that several of us within the college have been talking about that is almost, and I won't even just base it on that piece, but this kind of public hue and cry about the value of higher education, the suggestion that the worth is not as valuable as it could or should be, that we should move away from the traditional notions of what it means to be an educated American and to move into other spaces about that. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
So that to me is what's so striking, because often when people think about education, what's really important, they'll always talk about STEM, right? Science, and STEM is to me, STEM's a tool. What you really want to, I think is so important, is to have creative thinking. If we think about our economy today, so many of the big drivers of our business are people who sort of thought creatively about how to connect, art to technology. or art and design to food in this case. And so it has to be well-rounded. And so that idea of that specialization, I think you lose that. And this company I'm working for, Beyond Meat, the one out in California, is what's amazing about it is it has real science. We've got physicists and biologists and chemists thinking about how to put it to work in really in a beautiful, in this case, a meat product or a plant-based product, and how do you create a sensory experience that mimics meat perfectly? And that's not a science project, it's an art project. And it's a combination of art and science. And then our job as the leadership of the company, how do we make that accessible to somebody? It's certainly not a technology idea. That then is how do we make people redefine the notion of meat? So for generations until today, really until our generation, everyone's assumed meat is protein from an animal. And I believe that by the time my grandchildren are growing up, meat won't only be protein from an animal. It'll be protein, but it could be protein from plants just as easily. It could be protein from an animal.
Which I think is another thing that you'll see based on your influences from travel. I think if you look across the globe, there are far more people already thinking that than we are in this particular country.
Yeah, and also conscious of their impact on that,
So now that Coca-Cola has bought Honest Tea, what's your role now?
Yeah.
And how has that changed, or has it changed, your relationship with the product?
Yeah. Well, it hasn't changed my relationship with the product. I am as attached to it and as proud of it as I was. And people joke they'll never spot me without a bottle of Honest Tea. And it's usually the case.
It comes with it, see?
I bring it with me. And I still help drive innovation. We're just launching a drink in this market this coming year called Honest Sport. It's an organic sports drink. Really great product. We're excited to bring that to market. So my role now, I don't run the business the way I used to. It used to be, I had my own team and my own staff. We have now a general manager who does run the business out of Bethesda, and I work very closely with her, and both as an advisor, occasionally a course corrector. My job is to keep it honest, and there's moments where this isn't about Coca-Cola, but a big company will want to do things that big companies do. And I'll say that's what a big company is doing. It's not what Honest Tea is going to do.
That was actually one of my questions, because I think recently you pushed back against Coca-Cola's desire to remove the no high fructose corn syrup from the label.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah,
that sounds like inside information.
Yeah,
we can
well,
have.
it's just an example of how a big company, look, if Coca-Cola sells a product with lots of products with high fructose corn syrup, they don't want us to say no high fructose corn syrup on our package. And of course, on Honest Kids, we thought that was a relevant concern to put on the package. And so they, in sort of helping review the package, had said, well, that should come off. I said, well, I understand why that makes sense to you, but what about to the consumer? Do you think that's not important to the consumer? And if we're going to be a consumer-driven company, and if we're going to let the consumer lead us, we should be saying things that are relevant to the consumer. And so that language is still on the package. And it was not a easy line to say, but that was if there was ever a time where I was a Julie conscious company, that was it. Because I was looking at the top leadership at Coca-Cola saying this and thinking about,
I don't want to go home. I can't go home and not have fought for
this. That's right. So. And look, it's very unusual that an entrepreneur would sell a company. We're now, this February will be 10 years that Coca-Cola has been invested in Honest Tea. So that's very unusual for an entrepreneur to stick around like the way I have. But the only reason I do is because they listen to me, they respect me, and they've continued to be committed to the brand. And so, as long as that's the case, I'll continue to do it.
So you've talked a little bit about your Beyond Meat.
Yeah.
Talk us a little bit about what your current venture is, and maybe even what your next venture is after that.
Well, so right now I really do have these two, you could say they're two half-time jobs, but with me they're really two full-time jobs. So as executive chairman of Beyond Meat, we have this product that Steve was mentioning that we've launched called the Beyond Burger. It is the first plant-based burger to be carried in the meat section of the grocery store. And so I won't use the word veggie patty or veggie burger because that to me was really
it's a connotation.
Yeah. My family's been vegetarian for 13 years, and we have been consistently dissatisfied with the options. I joke that if you were trying to find a way to discourage people from being vegetarian, the veggie burger would be a great strategy. You eat one and you say, okay, I don't need to be a vegetarian that badly. But what's neat about the Beyond Burger is that it looks like a burger, it sizzles and grills like a burger, and the taste is really amazing. So it is now carried in over 8,000 grocery stores and restaurants around the country. And we've got some national authorizations from national chains like BurgerFi and some others that are really starting to spread it. And the goal there is certainly a health goal, right? That this is a product with no cholesterol, half the saturated fat of meat. But an environmental impact is profound. If the meat industry is the single largest contributor to greenhouse gases, more than all forms of transportation combined. And so if we can make a plant-based burger that has all the same sensory benefits of meat, but none of the health downsides or none of the environmental downsides, that can make a big impact on people's diets. And from a business case opportunity, so there's about 5% of the population is vegan, vegetarian. If we want to reach the larger audience, we shouldn't be selling our product in the freezer, we should be in the meat section. And the goal is, if we can get every American to have one more plant-based meal per week, so that's one meal out of 21 meals, that's about 5%, that would effectively be the same as doubling the amount of vegetarians in the country. But doing it in a way that we're not asking people to make a sacrifice, we're not giving them a lecture or a sermon about how you shouldn't be killing animals, we're just making a good tasting product available.
Meatless Mondays.
Well, I don't like the term meatless because it is meat.
Yeah.
So we're saying let's eat what you love. And it's redefining meat. And frankly, you know, I'm not just eating the burger on Mondays. I'll have it 3 or 4 times a week.
So here's the thing I'm very struck by as a business owner. I've heard you talk about how you are being socially conscious with your business practices. You are trying to do no harm to both your consumer and to the environment. I've heard you talk about the long-term implications of your business practices on the planet.
Right.
I've heard you talk about very conscious decisions that drive that. And as we are in this period that we're in our country, I am always trying to think of how to make arguments that would resonate to people who are now in charge of the government, that see themselves as business owners and business people. And I guess I was so struck by when you talked about your Beyond Meat, actually everything you wove through here, I kept thinking, then why aren't they listening to your type of business person, right? And so how do we create a space in our society where we're actually, in our culture, this moment, listening to business owners like yourself? Or are there so few of you?
Well, it's funny. So, you know, I didn't say this, but when I was in college, my major was a government major. And I thought I was going to go into politics. And, you know, as I said, I worked on the Capitol Hill, and so that was an area of interest. I have to say that I don't regret the decision I made to be doing what I'm doing. There's no question that consumers are listening to what I'm doing and what we're doing at these companies. Consumers are gravitating there. You know, I think it's what's striking to me is how our government, our politics it's kind of ossified. It's really feels to me like it's a dialogue of the past. There's no point in debating climate change to me because the consumer already knows that that's happening and the consumer's making choices about that. We don't even have to have a debate about whether the meat industry has a negative environmental impact. Consumers are already making choices for plant-based options.
So how do you grapple with, you know, I sit here and I think as someone who consumes a lot of your product.
Thank you.
People would tell me that I, though, may represent, I'm this organic drinking, USDA organic label, fair trade certified tea drinker who wants to see things unsweetened as I try to, you know, watch my A1. But there's a certain reputation, a connotation that's been wrapped around that type of consumer, right? And therefore, so you can be the organic, fair trade drinker, or you can be the this. So again, another false bifurcation. How do you combat that as a business owner?
So for me, that's why the McDonald's opportunity is so exciting, because that is, nobody goes to McDonald's saying, I want an organic product. You know, that's just a fact. I'm sorry, but that's true. And so now we're there, and we're part of, you know, reaching the consumer there. And so that's how we are democratizing these products. And the same with Beyond Meat. Obviously, it's like any new technology, it starts at both a premium price and at a limited audience. And as you get to scale, you are able to bring it out in a much more aggressive and broad way. And I see that happening, obviously happening with Honest Tea, but I also see that happening with Beyond Meat over time. So, you know, for me, that's what's exciting to see, is that the marketplace and consumers are responding. And I don't want to get too political for obvious reasons, but just to share with you, you look at how technology and communications have fragmented in so many ways, and to assume that our national dialogue should be split into just two sections, two opinions, is so antiquated, right?
I have one of my board members I see here, and we often have this conversation about, at some point, as you point out, how do we evolve our thinking in this space? Because we're so stuck in these kind of old definitions. I'm going to let here's the audience's your shot that I'm going to be coming to you momentarily. I want to end my question. I have several more, and if y'all don't ask, I'll go back to mine. But I do want to pose this question, kind of a reflective one. What do you know now, after having launched this successful business and having had the lived experiences that you've had, that you wish you'd known when you started this, that might benefit emerging entrepreneurs in this room and also students who are thinking about how to become entrepreneurs?
You know, a few things. So first of all, I'm not going to be one of those people who say, I wish I got into more baseball games. I actually coached my son's baseball team. So I made the decision early on that I wasn't going to be doing this, you know, staying up till 3 a.m. or I did put in, you know, I worked hard, but I made the decision early on that I had to have balance in order to, because you know, when I ran track in college, I ran long distance. I was not a sprinter, and this is not a sprint. And here I am 20 years later still going. So, you know, that to me was, at the time I didn't know that was the right decision. Now I do. You know, you've got to be able to, just like if you're training for a long race, you've got to develop your core strength. You can't just work on the muscles that are running. You've got to develop the rest of your strength so that you can, you know, still be strong at the end. And that of course, that metaphor is your spiritual, family, community, all those things. You have to think that way. You can't. It's not a. There was a period in the early 2000s around the .com where people were flipping companies, and maybe you can do that if you get lucky and you're able to flip something. But so that's one thing. I think the other thing that I did not know at the time I launched Honest Tea that this could be as fun as it was. And you know, because you're so scared when you're building a business, you know, it's tense and scary. And I in that first year, just when we launched, we had a family picnic. We brought our product to market over Memorial Day weekend in 1998. At that 4th of July, I was at a family picnic. I was having a piece of pizza, and I felt something crunchy in my mouth. I said, "There's not supposed to be anything, you know, hard and crunchy in pizza." And it turned out it was my tooth had cracked. And I went to the dentist, and she said, "Well, you're grinding your teeth at night." She said, "Are you under any stress?" I said, "I guess I am." So, you know, it's easy now to say, "Oh, you should have just enjoyed it," but you know, in some way I enjoyed it, but I was terrified.
But I have to tell you, I've been struck by your joy, and literally sitting across from you, and I don't think it's because you're on camera and we're live. You smile. There's a joy that is kind of effervescent from you.
Thank you.
And I know in that moment, certainly in that year when you're grinding your teeth and wondering if you, but there is something I think must be extremely liberating to be doing the work that you want to be doing, the way you want to be doing it, and impacting the way you. It comes out of you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, you know, so some people have said, you know, you were in the right place at the right time. Yeah. I think anytime you're doing work you believe in, you're in the right place at the right time. Even if it doesn't work out, you're in the right place at the right time.
With that, I will open up to the audience. Please make your way to the microphones. Remember, that's so that our live audience on MCTV is able to hear you. There's a microphone to that side, there's one here in the center, and there's one on that end. And if you wouldn't mind moving thoughtfully and quickly, you can line up, we don't mind, so we can keep those going.
No one else is getting in line. I will kick us off.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, Senator Cheryl Kagan, very proud to represent Gaithersburg and Rockville. And Seth, on this Giving Tuesday, I figured we might as well kick off with a question about your attitude and practice about philanthropy.
Sure.
In this area, nationally and internationally, what are your
Sure.
priorities? What are the company's priorities? And do they align? How much impact do you have now?
Absolutely, absolutely.
you.
So I can't help but give a plug for my wife's organization, Urban Alliance, which is where she works, and they help create, they place first generation of college high school students in professional internships, and often work with community colleges to help get them the right training and skills to, and really based on this idea that if we aren't able to help people access college, they're not going to be able to see long-term opportunities. So that's a high priority. As you would expect from the way I talked about my parents, we do support a lot of educational institutions, and that's certainly something we're connected to. We also are really attached to both Jewish organizations and to environmental stewardship organizations. So one of the neat things we did when just before we sold to Honest Tea is that, and I say we, this is my wife and I, donated a significant portion of the company to an entity called Impact Assets. It's run by the Calvert Foundation. And then that was a donation to charity, and then what we've done since then is used a portion of that money for donations, but also a portion of the money to go out and invest in other social entrepreneurs. And so it's really a virtuous cycle, because some of the companies have been sold and we were able to continue to reinvest in those communities. So we have, my wife and I have always felt like we're dealing in parallel fields. She's been in the nonprofit sector her career, and as I said, for me, most of my career has been in the for-profit sector, but we're going at a lot of the same issues from different angles.
Wonderful. Thank you. Please.
Good evening, Mr. Goldberg, and as well as for Dr. Pollard. Thank you for being here. And I have a question to ask you. So since you're the businessman for the Honesty back in 1998, and I know you are the...
Yeah, we hear you
Oh,
fine.
okay, yeah. And I know you're MBA students, and you know you're a small businessman, and the company like Coca-Cola paid $43 million to purchase the 40% of Honesty, with the main choice with the entire company back in 2011 is because your company requires to purchase several dozen contracts from independent distributor to the growth of Honesty. And I can say that as compared to Coca-Cola and Pepsi, the Honest Tea provides like all kinds of like organic sodium and sugar for the consumer industry. So how many % does the Honest Tea sold throughout the world?
Well, so first of all, we don't have any sodium in our drinks. They are all sodium-free. That's okay. But how much are we selling around the world? So we're primarily sold in the United States. We have sold over, I guess this past year we sold over 700 million servings.
Wow.
So it's a lot, but you know, there's billions served of other drinks,
Yeah.
so we're certainly looking to be that way. And so we're growing. You know, for us, it's what's neat is that we've got our Honest Kids drinks that are sold to younger audiences, and then Honest Tea sold to older audiences too. So we're really trying to think about all the different places where beverage occasions, and can we make an honest version of those drinks.
That's very good.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Professor.
Good evening, Mr. Goldman. My name is Dr. Durrani. I apologize for coming late because I was helping one of the students in an embedded program.
Don't ever apologize for that.
That's right.
And it's very good to see that we have Honest Chai. And I say chai because that's the one that I had grown up with. And I was also very pleased to see that you are using tulsi
Yes.
in some of your concoctions. I'm using that as a very positive one. I would like to know, how do you blend these various condiments, if you want to call it, and what is your secret to find out which is the best combination?
Yes. So it's a fun question. We actually did have a drink called Kashmiri Chai in our very first year when we launched. And so this was when we were getting started. I was developing the business out of my house. And so Barry and I were basically just ordering tea from any company we could find that had an interesting recipe. And so we had this chai recipe. It was a spice blend. That tasted really nice. And I found the number of the guy who made it because the internet wasn't as active as it was. So I called him. I said, we want to order 200 pounds of chai spice. He says, I make 20 pounds a weekend. I have a grinder in my backyard. I'm like, that's not going to work. And so Barry said, well, why don't we make our own blend? And I said, well, how am I going to do that? I have no culinary background. I make breakfast. I make breakfast for my kids, which means pouring cereal in a bowl and eggs, eggs on Friday, Saturday. So Barry said, well, how hard can it be? We know what's in chai, right? It's cloves, it's cardamom, it's cinnamon, ginger. He says, you're near Baltimore. Go up to find a spice house. Go to Baltimore. Take 10 pounds of each ingredient and just keep mixing it. And I said, that's crazy. But he said, what's so crazy? And he was right. So I went to Baltimore. I went to this place, Van Spices, and this woman, Ann Wilder, walked me through all the different spices. And we ended up making this amazing chai just by trial and error until we found the right recipe. The funny thing about that was that the chai, it's very strong, the aroma. And so we had to drive the spices up to Buffalo, is where our bottling plant was. So I took 800 pounds of chai blend, put it in my Saturn station wagon, drove it up to Buffalo, and by the time I got there, it was like the permanent air freshener aroma. But the Tulsi is another one that's a wonderful ingredient. It's called holy basil. It's just a basil leaf, but it's an herbal tea that we make. And I had been in India and seen the way this plant is so revered in India, and thought, wow, it's an amazing plant. What if we could find a way to commercialize it? And so we helped support the farmers and helped create a drying system so that they could not just grow it, but they could also process it, and that helped them capture much more of the income than just selling it as usually it was being sold for garlands, and they couldn't really make as much money. And it's one of my favorite drinks. That said, we make a lot of drinks that have not worked out. We had a whole brewed cacao business that didn't work out. We had a kombucha line that didn't work out. So the more you try, the better your chances.
Very good. We'll go to Mr. Chicago. Chicago in the house.
Hey, Seth. I'm actually from Buffalo originally.
there you go.
Name's Mike Greco. I don't know if before you became a vegetarian you had the wings up there, but they're amazing. So, you read about a lot of entrepreneurs having these daily routines that help them through the day and with focus and success
question.
and those kinds of things. First question is, do you have any of those and any advice that you could give us? And secondly, what's the vision for Honest Sport?
Sure. So yes, I'm just thinking about some of it. I guess I don't consciously think about the routine, but so the day starts with my wife and I make the bed. That's all. You always start with a well-made bed so you can end with a well-made bed to go into. Usually up by 5:30, and we'll get at least sort of an hour to an hour and a half of exercise in. And that's mostly, it is good for me physically, but I actually do it mostly for my mental state, just to be clear. And it's usually by myself. Just I don't have to listen to anything. I'll just be able to just process whether it's tensions or creativity. We'll come through that. And then we'll always find a way to interact with so I have 3 sons and my wife, and we'll find a way to interact with each of them in some way, even if it's just a text message or a quick phone call, just to let them know I'm thinking of them. And then my mom, who is now, so my dad died in August, and so my mom's memory is not good, so she emails me about the same thing dozens of times, but I'll answer each email just to let her know that she's not alone. And so those are, I would say, as part of a routine, the way I do things. With Beyond Meat, I'm not always physically there, but the CEO and I have a regular cadence every other day. We're checking in right at noon. We have a check-in call. Sometimes, like today, we just talked about Thanksgiving and what it was like. But other times we'll go through a particular issue with the business. But it's so having that regular cycle is just a great structure to how the day goes. Oh, and it's Honest Sport. So Honest Sport, look, it was amazing to me. I did a triathlon a few years ago. At the finish line, I'm seeing all these healthy people, And I'm looking at a blue sports drink, and I said, there's no one here that's buying a blue sports drink, or maybe they're buying it, they don't want it. Why aren't any of these drinks organic? And so obvious, and so we worked, I said, I worked with we have a great group, two food scientists from the University of Maryland who are on our staff. I said, what about a sports drink? Is there anything in a sports drink that isn't organic? And well, no, you got the sodium, we can use sea salt, and the potassium is available, and you have to have carbs, but we can use organic cane sugar. This seems pretty simple to me, and we tasted it, and it tasted actually cleaner and lighter than the other drinks. This is organic sports drink. So we're not going to be marketing it the way the big brands market their sports drinks, and not initially. We'll be piloting it, and Maryland is going to be one of the markets that will be piloted in, so you will start to see it starting early next year. And to me, there's a lot of upside for that.
Especially, there seems to be a health consciousness that's really permeating the country in a lot of ways. I think it will be, particularly on college campuses,
Absolutely.
I think it will resonate.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chicago Buffalo guy. Right in the middle.
Hi,
We can hear
it's
you.
on.
Yeah, we hear you.
so I'm here on behalf of Marketing to Levin, and my name is Lucas Dries, and I've lived in the DC area all my life. How did you find, throughout your career, how did you find out your competitors' motives?
Yeah, I don't get hung up on competition. I mean, I'm a very competitive person, and I want to win every day, but I know what can I control? I can't control what my competition does. I can only control what I do. And it's very easy to get bogged down in that negative mindset of, what are they doing? They said something bad about me. There's a great quote. It's one of our bottle cap quotes. I actually saw it when I must have been about 8 years old watching the Fat Albert show. And he said, he who throws mud only loses ground. And you can get stuck in the negative swirl and worked up about it, or you can just focus on what you can do, and if try to be positive about it. So that's how I think about it.
That's profound, particularly in these moments that we're living in.
Right? It's so easy to get caught
up
in
in
it.
other
We
people.
were driving around this weekend, and my sister said, "Oh, do you want to hear the latest Trump
Yes.
tweet?" I said, "I don't."
No.
And she wanted to tell me so badly. I said, "I'm not going to give you that satisfaction. I'm not
gonna
going
listen
there."
to it. Next over here, I'm going to go to this microphone. Are you all just standing, or are you in line? Okay, then I'll come back over to you, Steve. I see you. No, you're not.
Seth, I was listening to a podcast that you had done on NPR, and one of the stories I remember you telling about, I think others would probably find interesting, was you talked about how hard it was to sort of break into a big place like Whole Foods with your product, and then you had like this disaster. And I've studied a lot about crisis communication, crisis management, and I thought it was a good lesson. So
Yeah, this is the broken. So in 2003, this is broken glass. I think, yeah. So 2003, which was a really growth year for us. We're growing, and then we ended up getting a report about a piece of broken glass inside a bottle, and that's a big. You don't want that. That's not in the recipe, and so. We did some investigation. It turns out that our supplier had delivered some faulty glass with blisters in it, that exploded when it got filled with heat, because we heat our tea up to 190 degrees when it goes in the bottle. That bottle has to be strong. That's why those glass bottles are as thick as they are to withstand that heat. So that was scary. And then it turns out we got a call that was one call from a Whole Foods store, and then a second Whole Foods store called and found a bottle of broken glass. So the customer had brought in the bottle. And so we knew it's 3 strikes and you're out at Whole Foods. So we didn't know how widespread this was, but we decided to pull all of our product. We initially said, well, we know the date of when it was made. We can try to pull it back. We just said, we got to pull everything back. And it was painful because we're doing about $6 million in sales. And so that was at least, 10% of our sales just pulled. We just said, we're taking everything off the shelves. And it was scary because it wasn't like we had the money to be able to afford to do that, but we also knew we couldn't not do that. Not when you call yourself Honest Tea and that's you're creating that risk. So we managed to stay in business. There was another company that had the exact same delivery of glass and didn't do that, and they're not in business anymore. So, you know, in retrospect, it was the right decision. But, and that goes back to what I said, you gotta be able to act in a way that you believe in. But at the time, that could have been one of those cases where, you know, we're doing the right thing and it didn't, you know, wouldn't have worked out.
And what was your simple message to your consumer in that?
We basically said we had broken glass. You know, there's no way to sugarcoat it.
No.
It's like you don't try, oh, you know, production interruption. No, it's like we had broken glass in a bottle. We explained what happened. It was a faulty delivery of glass. We changed the whole way the bottles were monitored. We did replace the quality engineer, and we changed our glass supplier. And we shared all of that,
Yeah.
but it was painful,
Yes.
scary.
Very good. Please, sir.
Hi. Well, first I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to young entrepreneurs. As a father, my son is incorporating today, and he heard you about 5 years ago.
Oh, wow.
So I'm thinking you might have had part of the world.
That's great. Congratulations.
One of the things I didn't hear was, what do you think your break was? Tea was not new when you invented
Yeah.
your concoctions.
Yeah.
So what was it? Distribution, advertising? What was
Yeah.
it?
You know, it's funny. There's no silver bullet here. This was, over the years we built this, and we're coming up, it'll be Honest Tea's 20th anniversary in February, which is a long time, right? I think a lot of people, probably older than some people in this room, if I had to guess. And so there was no breakthrough. It really was. Well, to start with, we had an idea that a product that was different. It was differentiated, right? It wasn't like everything else out there. So that was important. We had a good brand name that stood for something, that communicated what it was, you know, simple and transparent, and a product that tasted like tea, made with real tea leaves. But yeah, other than that, it was just a lot of hard work. It really was. I mean, you know, I remember the day we were very fortunate to have Gary Hirschberg, the CEO of Stonyfield Farm, he's CEO. So I'm the TEO. He was the CEO because he had a yogurt company. Stonyfield Farm Yogurt. He invested and he joined our board. And I thought, this is going to be it. You know, we're going to. All of a sudden, the phone's going to light up. The fax machine's going to heat up with orders because we still had fax orders. No, you still got to get up and sell tea every day. So there just wasn't I mean, obviously working with Coke was a big step change in our distribution. That, you know, before Coke invested, we were in about 15,000 stores. Today, as you heard, over 130,000 stores. Other than that, it was just a lot of hard work. We got lucky. You got, you know, Oprah Winfrey found a bottle of the tea and liked it. And now, you could say found it, but Barry ended up going to my co-founder, Barry was my professor. He went to a yoga retreat, and Oprah was on the mat next to him, and he had a bottle of tea, and someone said, well, how did you know Oprah was going to be there? He said, I didn't know. I just always have a bottle of tea with me. So she liked it. We got a nice little write-up. But at the time, the write-up, you know, we got into O Magazine, but there was no distribution. So it wasn't like it boosted sales. So it was, for as many times as we got lucky, we got unlucky. And I just think it was a lot of hard work and a lot of passion and belief. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Seth, you talked about how you live a really healthy life. How do you encourage your employees to do the same, either through employee wellness programs or
Sure.
incentives?
Yeah. Well, it's hard, right? Because you can't dictate, you know, sometimes you feel like you'd like to dictate how people live, and that's just not within our power. But we do everything we can to provide that opportunity. So we do have a wellness coach, you know, that can provide one-on-one counseling to people, as well as we actually bring in twice a week a fitness instructor to the office, and they'll, you know, one day they'll do yoga, and the other day they'll do a little boot camp in the office after hours. A few times over the company's history, we actually bought bikes for all the employees instead of a bonus. We just bought them bikes. We were doing a national bike promotion at Honest Tea, so I said, let's just add on, you know, 50 or 100 bikes to the purchase order for all the employees. It doesn't mean that they'll all use those bikes, but at least we feel like we're creating that incentive. We also have, we bring in it's called the Fruit Guys, and they deliver fruit to the office, you know, several times a month for people just to snack on, so we're promoting healthy snacks that way. I've made it a rule that whenever we do have a company lunch, there has to be, this is selfish, but there has to be plant-based options. I mean, you know, not just because I'm hungry, but I want to model that for the employees too. So those are some of the things we do. The other thing is just trying to support the employee, the whole employee. You know, you can't only deal with people, even if they're only in the office 9 to 5, a lot of them work out, you know, virtually from their homes, but just to recognize that they're living their lives. And so you can't expect people to, if they have to take off for whatever family situation they have or personal situation, you have to support them in that. And I think we have done a good job of that.
Sana?
Hello.
Hi.
It's a pleasure to meet you and a joy. 'Cause
Thank
I'm
you.
an organic person, and I'm so happy to see you here. And I'm also a Hillman entrepreneur student, and there's also entrepreneurs in the room right here with me. And I would like to ask you, how did this idea of tea came about? Because I remember when I was reading about you, you said the idea started with your professor, your school professor.
Yeah.
So how did this idea come about?
Yeah.
This tea idea.
Yeah. So it's funny. Let's start with, it's true, I did discuss the idea when I was in the classroom, but I didn't pursue it at the time. At the time I was in the classroom, we said that this is a neat idea. We were doing a case study of the beverage industry, and when he asked what's missing, I said there's all these sweet drinks and all these watery drinks, but nothing like this. But I didn't do anything about it. It was only after I moved to Bethesda and was working for a different company. I was working for Calvert, which does the investment funds. And I started to get restless. Like I knew I was ready to launch something. I didn't know what. It could have been a nonprofit. It could have been a totally different business idea. So I was just waiting for the right idea. And I went for a run in Central Park. I'd given a presentation in New York. After the run, I went to a cooler, a beverage cooler, and I said, there's nothing here. And I was with a friend. He says, what do you mean? There's lots of drinks. I said, they're all the same. They all have the same calorie profile, either 100 calories or water. And they almost all have the same ingredients, but there's nothing like this. And I said, I think I want to do something about this. And so that kind of, that idea came to me at a moment where I was ready to do something. And then I remember the conversation at Yale when I'd been with Barry and we talked about it. And Barry had just come back from India. And so when I reached out to him, I had said, when I was a student, we had actually talked about the idea for a juice and seltzer business, which is not tea at all. It's just a lightly sweetened juice and seltzer. And he said, I just came back from India, and I was studying the tea industry. And while I was there, I came up with this name, Honest Tea. And I'm like, wow. That's amazing, right? That's got the health orientation. It's got that socially responsible aspiration embedded in the name. It's a natural product. It tastes good without a lot of sweetener, or it can if you use real tea leaves. And then it kind of just all sort of built on itself. But so on the one hand, you could say that was a coincidence or a nice convergence of ideas. But you could also sort of say that kind of came out of my life. I'd spent a year in China, spent a year in Russia, had that health orientation, had the running, so I was always thirsty. So I sort of was always predisposed to it. But obviously a little bit of serendipity,
Last thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what are the most crucial things you have done to grow your business?
So there's actually three key things that every entrepreneur, in fact, every CEO has to do. The first one is you have to come up with a vision. You have to be able to identify what you want to build, and you have to be able to communicate that to people. So identifying the vision and communicating it. The second thing you have to do is create a team of people, assemble a team of people to help you execute that vision. Finding the right people and giving them that inspiration and managing them. And then the third thing is you have to give them the resources to do their job. So in Honest Tea's case, it meant raising money from investors. So I still, even though I thought I was out there I got out of fundraising, I still had to raise money from investors to help create the resources for those people to do their job to carry out that vision. And that's really the three things I did, or do.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ms. Pollard.
Thank you. Dorothy?
So you've invested all of this energy and all of this passion. You've built a wonderful company.
Thank you.
You found someone who was willing, Coca-Cola, who was willing to invest it. You still are involved.
Right.
What happens when you are gone?
It's a fair question. I don't know. But one of the reasons I'm still involved is because I want to help ensure the legacy of it. And I know that every year we continue and every year we grow, what do you say, the best defense is a good offense, the harder it will be, the less there'll be a temptation to strip away what we've built. And so, now that we're launching Honest Tea in Europe and in other parts of the world, I'm out there communicating what it stands for and kind of enforcing it too, like, no, you can't go that sweet, or what's your plan to get this to be fair trade or to get it to be organic. So I think to the extent we can build it and we talk about Honest Tea, it's not a case of, our business model isn't to give away the profits at charity. That's not the model. It's to make the product itself the impact. And so, we talk about mission in a bottle. It's in the bottle itself. And so as long as the product is made that way and still has those characteristics, I'm hopeful it will persist. And I guess the longer I can stick around to do it, as I said, as long as it keeps growing and I feel like it's something I continue to believe in, I'll stick around.
And protect the brand.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. So, no, just the line, no line here. I'll go here.
Hello, I'm Ola Lakin, a member of the Human Entrepreneurs Program as well.
Great.
I just wanted you to talk about, if you haven't already, talk about one of the most challenging adaptations you've had to do as entrepreneur yourself or for your company, if you haven't shared that experience with us already. And also, I wanted to know, you seem like you are about doing the right thing for your product. How far are you willing to go if it's at a cost that it's kind of hefty for you?
Yeah. So I'd actually, if it's okay, I'd like to take this in a personal direction. So when we launched the company in 1998, this was so I left my job at the investment fund in January, and I started Honest Tea in February. In March, so just basically a month into the business, I had managed to get an appointment with Whole Foods, so I was getting ready for that meeting. And Barry came down, we were brewing the tea to get ready for Whole Foods. And my wife walks in the house with our son, our middle son, who at the time was 4 years old. They'd just come back from the doctor, and so as she walks in, she has this terrible, ashen look on her face, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, she's upset because we got tea everywhere, tea leaves and bowls and jars, and I think, and I said, well, we're going to clean this up. She says, can I talk to you for a minute? And she pulls me over, and our son had just been diagnosed with a major coronary issue. He was going to have open heart surgery. So here I am, just left a good paying, solid job. I'm trying to prepare for the biggest meeting of my life the next day, and our son has this issue. And he ended up going through he had to get his aorta. His aorta had been closed off, and so we had to open it up and major surgery, like I said, intensive care for several weeks at Children's Hospital. And so all that was going on. I still had to build a business. I still had to, create the business, as I knew if we didn't get into Whole Foods and if we didn't launch in Whole Foods in this time frame, it's not like you launch an iced tea company in the fall. And frankly, if she had had that appointment, if our son had had that appointment 2 months earlier, probably wouldn't have launched. I'd probably say, okay, this is a nice idea, but not the right time to do it. So the adaptation was I had to compartmentalize. And so I would sleep, next to my son at the hospital. I'd sort of get up in the middle of the night. I had a guy who was working on formulations, and he'd meet me in the lobby of the hospital, and we'd taste some teas, and then I'd go back up. But you just have to keep going forward. So that was kind of a personal, certainly a personal challenge for me. Now the good news is our son he graduated from college. He's actually teaching in Chicago, doing Teach for America in his second year. And he still has heart issues. He had to have his aorta replaced just about 18 months ago. So we still deal with it, but he's a fighter and got a great spirit. So.
So thanks for showing up here. So with the current economy and current status of business, there's been a lot of companies that have been able to do things differently. They've been industry disruptors like Uber, things like that. So in other words, if you were to go back in time today, what would you do differently? What would you encourage the current college students or entrepreneur to do to disrupt the the industry, so to speak?
Sure. Well, it's funny because at the time we launched, 1998 and then 99, 2000, the big thing was the .com boom.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, oh, you got to be honesttea.com. I'm like, I don't understand how making honesttea.com, like, I still can't send the bottle through the pipes. You know, what we did was kind of counter to where all the trends were, but it was a relevant idea then. It's still relevant today. What I would say, it all depends on your specialty, your orientation, and your passion. But to me, look at the opportunity. I've never known a moment where there's so much the case that the impact, the opportunity to make an impact on health and an environment coincide with economic opportunity. The consumer's never been that motivated to do it. So here's, to me, the most compelling statistic. Every 5 years, the UN ranks the average life expectancy of all the countries in the world. So the 200 countries in the world, even though the United States is the wealthiest nation in the history of the world, with more knowledge of science and medicine and nutrition than any civilization has had, in the 2015 rankings, you had Japan had the highest life expectancy. Italy was number 2. The United States was number 42. And so to me, that is just shameful. But it also is an incredible opportunity to help people in the world's wealthiest nation lead healthier, longer, better quality of life. That's an opportunity. And so I would think if you have a way to help people lead better lives, healthier lives, more sustainable lives, there's money to be made. And I don't say that, you know, it should come from a place of belief, but
Right.
it's an exciting moment.
Would you still have done that through a beverage, or would you?
So you know, I do think that was that was a good idea at the time. I have to say, for me, what Beyond Meat is doing right now is as exciting as any enterprise I can imagine, because it has, I don't know any other food category or almost any other category where you can impact environment so directly. So the opportunity to affect environment, health, energy constraints, and is so powerful. So I think, you know, that said, I still love Honest Tea. I'm still excited about it, but I do think what's going on in the plant-based world is a really exciting moment.
Thank you. We'll come here, and this is our last question for the night.
Okay. What was your biggest mistake?
Oh, my.
And how did you recover from it?
Yeah. So I'll tell you sort of the micro mistake and then the macro lesson of it. The biggest mistake was that for 6 years, we owned a bottling plant. We owned a third of a bottling plant. And it was the longest 6 years of my life. It was a bottling plant outside of Pittsburgh. And I was driving back and forth, worrying about change parts, worrying about boilers, all these things that have nothing to do with building a brand. And when I finally, we managed to sell off our interest in it, but we didn't make any money on it. We lost money. We lost about $1 million. But the biggest drain on it was my energy. Like, the only asset I brought to this, I mean, yes, I had some creative ideas, but it's my energy, right? My ideas and energy. And so when I'm driving, you know, leaving at 3 in the morning to get to the plant by 7 and leaving at 8 o'clock, you know, barely making it home at midnight, I'm toast for like the next day or two. And then I can't bring that positivity to the business. So it helped me realize what we were really building wasn't a bottling plant, and we had a tea bag line. That was also a mistake. What we were really building was this idea of Honest, is that brand. That was so the macro lesson was really make sure you're building what you're building, you know, and don't spend energy and time building something that isn't really the value.
Thank you so much. I really want to thank Seth. Can you all join me in thanking him for this evening? I have been profoundly, and I think I mentioned it earlier, this energy that comes from you, and this deep consciousness and intentionality about the work that you do. And I really want to thank you. And it also gives me a lot of hope, because I think that as we are living in times where we are oftentimes forced to think of business in one construct in our head. Yeah. You have reminded us, as do all of the business folks who work with the college and think intentionally about how we do this work. You've manifest that in this conversation today. And I think that your sharing of stories, how it began, the issues that you grapple with, the things you've learned from it, are so important to those of us who are in this room, our students, our employees, our community members, those entrepreneurs in the room who are trying to figure out how to find their special thing that they're trying to do. I also find it profoundly intersecting with another issue that we're talking a lot about here at the college, about ethics, about equity, about inclusion. And for me, there's a message out of that about how one chooses to do that deliberately each and every day in the work that you do. So I want to thank you, Seth, for sharing your wisdom, your insight, your energy, something I'm going to remember from this moment. And thank you, because I know you're getting on a flight tomorrow to Europe, so thank you for choosing to be here tonight. I also want to thank Bethesda Magazine, because I believe between Bethesda Magazine and Bethesda Beat, probably some of you, how many of you heard about the event via that? Some of you did? I really want to thank you for that, because they have been wonderful media sponsors for this particular event. I know that we have a lot of people who are online or in TV land watching this, so I want to thank you all for being a part of that. This idea of, for us as a community college, turning the college inside out, inviting people to us and engaging and serving as this convener for our community is very important to us. And I'm just so honored that we're on this journey together of talking about defining America, what that means from different angles. I would be remiss if I did not take the opportunity in my last 2 minutes before we are no longer live in thanking the people who make this happen. Dr. Megan Gibbons out of my office, our special events team here at the college, and certainly MCTV, who makes us sound good and look good, and also ensures that we have a broader audience in this space. So thank you all for your role in this. I hope that you would choose to be active and participate in our next conversation. We will have on February 20th, my guest will be the director of the Montgomery County Correctional Facility, Rob Green. Rob is profound in his conversation that we must not forget anyone as we move forward and talk about the ways in which it means to be an American and live in this country. So please stay around for a reception that we're having outside. I happen to know that we have honest tea for us. Please join us for that. And thanks again, Seth, so much for being you. That's a wrap.